One of my favorite things in the world to do is watch Friends. I know it's been off for years and years. It's not even around, but I still find myself binge watching old episodes. And I was thinking about this today and thinking, it's the predictability of the friends in the circle, right? You have Chandler with his quirkiness, Monica with her type A of just everything has to be so neat and tidy and organized. It's Phoebe's ability to make you laugh at her silly songs. Ross always comes in with those smart comments, and Joey and him and his food, like it is just so hilarious. And of course, Rachel, she just brings everybody together, and it's just such this beautiful, cohesive team of people. And it's why I wanted to come on and share with you today that I have an opportunity for you to find your friends in the content creation space. So if you are thinking about creating your first or your next digital course, I don't want you to miss this opportunity because Amy Porterfield just opened the doors for registration for her Course Confident Bootcamp. And I'm actually offering a special bonus for anyone that registers for the Course Confident Bootcamp through my special link. So I want you to go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register. That's crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And what you're going to find when you get there is I have this special bonus private podcast series. It's called Money Mindset for Creators. So I want you to go register for Amy's bootcamp, download the podcast, and immediately start listening to it, because what this training is set up to do is to help you get your mind right about monetizing your content, making money so that you can fuel your content creation dreams. So go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register for Course Confident. And I cannot wait for you to find your friends and find the people that will be there for you. Do you see what I did there? Yeah, nice little friends segue connection. Go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And I cannot wait to see you inside. Okay, let's get into today's episode. Oh my goodness, I am so excited about today's episode because we have someone from BuzzSprout to come talk to us about podcast hosting sites. And what the heck is a podcast hosting site? Well, we're going to get into all of that today, but just know that it's one of those things that you have to have in place in order for your podcast to get out into the world. So if you've been creating content or doing interviews and getting everything ready to launch, then this is what you're going to be looking at right before you start putting your podcast out into the world. Or if you've already launched and you're not happy with the organization or the platform that you're using now, then I want you to consider switching to BuzzSprout, and I will give you a million reasons why during this interview. But yeah, let's just get right into it. Welcome to the Profit Podcast, where we teach entrepreneurs how to start, launch, and market their podcast. I'm your host, Crystal Profit, and I'm so excited that you're here. Thanks for hanging out with me today. Because if you've been thinking about creating a podcast for a while, well, I'm so glad you found this show. Think of this as the shortcut / time-saving version of searching Google and YouTube for hours and hours trying to figure out the world of podcasting. Trust me, as a busy mama of 3, I get it. You don't have a lot of time to be spent or wasted, I should say, searching the web, trying to find all the right ideas and all the amazing things that are out there, and you just end up overwhelmed. Trust me, I've been there, done that, took home the souvenir. But this podcast is going to help you in practical ways, because twice a week we'll be delivering episodes that are going to give you steps to help you create a podcast your audience can't wait to listen to. So let's get right to it, shall we? Have you been wanting to start a podcast? You've been thinking about it. It feels right. You just know this is the next thing that my business needs. Well, I encourage you to sign up for my 5-day podcast bootcamp. This is a thing that you have been looking for. It is a 5-day video series where I walk you through exactly how to start, launch, and market your podcast. And I throw in some more information about planning strategies and being consistent and how you can make the most out of your podcast from day one. So sign up for our 5-day Create Your Podcast Bootcamp at crystalprofit.com/podcast bootcamp. And do it already. You know that you've been wanting to, so just bite the bullet and join us. So, like I said, today's guest is someone from the BuzzSprout community. And when I say that, I mean they work for BuzzSprout, which is super cool that Travis took time out of his day to sit down and talk to me about podcast hosting and all the things that he knows about what's going on in the podcasting world right now and kind of what they see coming up in the future for BuzzSprout and the industry as a whole. So it was a really cool conversation to kind of get like the behind the scenes look at what is a podcast hosting site, like what is the actual purpose that they serve, and what are they thinking about as they develop these platforms for podcasters. So if you don't currently have a podcast hosting site, then you're going to get a lot of your questions answered today about, what they do and how they can help you and ways they can make your life easier. But as we're talking about podcast hosting sites and everything that you need to get started with a podcast, I wanted to take a second and tell you about my digital course, Profit Podcasting, because the doors are opening again at the end of August for just a short period of time. And if you've listened to a few podcast episodes or you've enjoyed any of the other content I've been putting out on social media, then you're going to love the digital course because I walk you through everything you need to know in order to start, launch, and market your podcast in 30 days. So be the first to know when the doors open again on August 30th. And if you're listening to this later, then they're only going to be open a short period of time. And you can always check back and see if the course is open. But if you want to get notified as soon as the doors open, then go to crystalprofit.com/podcast course and join the waitlist. Okay, so I'm not going to keep you any longer. Let's jump right into my interview with Travis from BuzzSprout. All right, Profit Podcast listeners, I'm so excited for today's guest. I have Travis Albritton from BuzzSprout. So welcome to the show, Travis.
Thanks for having me, Crystal. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so I have to preface this entire episode with saying an apology to Travis. I'm kind of eating my own words because I had told him on our Buzzcast interview back in December, I would never have guys on my podcast. That's just not, sorry. I had actually apologized to him. Sorry, Travis, it's not going to happen. Now I'm eating my own words. So I just wanted to start at this that Travis is an expert in the podcasting world and he knows all things hosting sites. So I'm so happy for you to be here with us.
Yeah, I'm excited. And thank you for making an exception for me to
Yeah.
come and serve your audience. I'm excited.
Yeah. So let's just kind of start at the beginning. I know that, how long have you been with BuzzSprout? Can you kind of give us like the origin story of BuzzSprout, how it came to be and how you joined them and all of their awesomeness?
Sure. Yeah. So I've been at BuzzSprout for a little over a year now. And BuzzSprout just turned 10 actually recently. And it's a really cool origin story because 10 years ago, podcasting was still very new. And the way that BuzzSprout even came to be was the co-founders, Kevin and Tom, were both a part of a church that wanted to start putting their sermons online, but they didn't really have a way to do that in an audio form. And so they're like, we're kind of, tech savvy. We have this online business, these SaaS software products. Maybe we can come up with something. And so they just created something to help their church start putting out their sermons in a podcast. And it just kind of grew from there to, now that we're helping over 100,000 podcasters on a monthly basis. And so it's just been really cool to see the growth and how it's evolved over time. But yeah, so BuzzSprout started with very humble origins and is now one of the main podcast hosts that's out there. And so, but my role with BuzzSprout is head of content. So I essentially am the the podcast coach, so to speak. So I write the blogs and produce podcasts and make videos and stuff like that, really just from the perspective of helping podcasters be successful. We know that if people are successful and they reach their goals and they, start to see momentum and have their questions answered and feel like they can do it, then they'll stick with it longer, and that'll help them, which will in turn help us as well. So it's definitely something that I enjoy doing. My job is essentially just helping people podcast, which is like the greatest job in the world.
Yes.
So yeah, so it's been great, and I've been doing that for about a year.
That's awesome. Well, I have to say, what really drew me to signing up for BuzzSprout, was first of all, it was a recommendation from Pat Flynn. I'm sure if you've been in the podcasting world, you know that like he's kind of the go-to person when it comes to figuring out podcasting, and which is what I'm aspiring to be. I'm like, I'm going to be the next Pat Flynn. That is like what I have written on my wall. It's like that's going to happen. I'm the female Pat Flynn. That's my goals. But I was just so impressed. And I didn't even actually look into other podcast hosting sites because y'all's resources were so spot on. Like there was blog posts and there was YouTube videos, and now there's podcasts about podcasting, and then y'all's, 5-Minute Mondays. There's just so many great resources to help someone get started. So I really appreciate that from someone who didn't have a clue what they were doing to, helping me be successful along this journey. So I really appreciate that. But what exactly, for someone who's just getting started and, they're just kind of dipping their toe in the water, they're thinking about starting a podcast, and they're like, whoa, I'm in the content planning stage. I don't even, what is a hosting site? Can you explain to everyone what exactly a podcast hosting site does?
Sure. So probably an easier way to picture this for somebody who's just getting started is if you listen to podcasts in an app like Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Google Podcasts, you're like, okay, I want my podcast to show up there. And I have this audio file of this episode that I put together. How do I get this episode into all these places where people can listen? So that's where the host kind of plays a role, where instead of trying to figure out how do I get my episode into each of these platforms individually, how do I manage all of my audio files? How do I collect statistics so I know how I'm doing and where I can improve? The host manages all of that for you. So the way that podcasts work is they work on top of a technology called an RSS feed, which was created when blogging started getting really big, and it was a simple way to get updates about new content from blogs you wanted to pay attention to. So podcasting was created on the back of that technology, where now when you publish an episode to your podcast host, it shows up automatically in all of the apps that your podcast is listed in. But you need a company or a host to manage your audio files, so you're not dragging down the bandwidth on your website. You need a podcast host that can manage all of your statistics for you, to pull the listener and download statistics from all the different apps and put them into something that you can understand and keep track of. And then also to be able to manage your RSS feed. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've heard of people trying to manage their own RSS feed and then they get a tag wrong, or they mislabel something, and then now all of a sudden their podcast doesn't exist on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And so there's so many different ways to mess it up. And so that's where a podcast host comes in and says, we'll deal with all the technical stuff. You just upload your audio here and we'll make sure it gets everywhere else.
Oh my gosh. As someone, like, I feel like I'm kind of middle of the road, technically savvy. Like, I understand a lot of things, but I don't get some of the technical nuances. So I totally appreciate the fact that if I can just get this thing edited and into the right format and upload it, then it's done. Like, I can do all the stuff that I'm good at, that my zone of genius is the marketing and, like, talking about, promoting the podcast, but doing all that. I so appreciate everything. But you said a few times, all of the platforms. And so a question that I get asked a lot is, where should I put my podcast? Do I need to connect it to, in the entire kingdom come, that is out there? What is your take on that?
So there's something that not many people know about that is helpful to understand even before I answer the question. And that's the difference between a podcast directory and a podcast catcher.
Oh,
Right.
okay.
So a podcast directory is is something that you submit your podcast to. Apple Podcasts is a podcast directory. iHeartRadio is a podcast directory. Spotify is a podcast directory. And so for each of those apps, websites, you submit your podcast to them, and when it's accepted, they list it. And then there are hundreds of other apps and listening services that mirror those directories. So like Overcast, which is the app that I like to listen to podcasts on, gets all of their podcast information from Apple Podcasts. So if you get into Apple Podcasts, you'll also be in Overcast. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yep.
And so if you can get listed in like the top 5 directories, it essentially takes care of your reach problem.
Oh.
So if you're in Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn, those 6, you'll essentially be everywhere. And so that's really helpful to know, because that's not nearly as overwhelming, right? It's okay, I just got to be in this 6, and then I'll be good.
Right. Well, and I just love that just explaining the hosting site, because I think what a lot of brand new podcasters, they see all of the places, right? The millions of places that, you can show up, and they immediately get overwhelmed because they don't understand how everything works. And so they're like, so you're telling me I have to upload every episode every week to all of these places? And I'm like, no. Like, take a deep breath. It's okay. Like, BuzzSprout's got you covered. Like, just get everything set up from the beginning correctly. And that's it. All you have to do is worry about one file every week or whenever you upload your new episodes. So I did not know that. I learned something new today. So I appreciate your wisdom. But I guess, what is another special feature or a resource that BuzzSprout has that either a lot of people don't really know about, or that people just aren't taking advantage enough? Like, maybe y'all know of something that y'all have that's super spectacular, and just people just don't know about it, or they don't use it very often.
Yeah, there's 2 that come to mind. One is something that we just revamped recently, which is our visual sound bites. And so, because a lot of the problem with promoting podcasts on social media is there's not really a great way to upload an audio file to Facebook or Instagram and have people actually listen to it.
Right.
Because social media is just very visual in nature. And so we created a really simple, essentially video creator that takes a section of your podcast episode, creates this fancy soundbite with like a waveform, and it's interactive, and it's easy to see that something's going on, as an easy way to promote your podcast on social media. And so that's something that we just released recently as like a 2.0 version of the soundbite, and all the feedback we've gotten has been extremely positive about that so far.
It's amazing. I love it. Like, I just started a YouTube channel about podcasting, and the video that's coming out like very soon is all about the brand new tutorial, because the branding, like that, I felt like that was the one thing that could have been like, just boom, like knocked it out of the park. And I love, and something that y'all completely surprised me with, was the different sizes. Like, that was perfect. Being able to share it on multiple platforms, whether it's social media, YouTube, or your own website. Like, that was just, yes, y'all did amazing. Y'all did a great job with that.
Yeah. So definitely the vision, and there's more robust tools out there. So if you want to get super fancy and make it look like a graphic designer created this, promotional material for you, Wave, spelled with 2 V's, and Headliner are 2 websites where you can really get into the details and create all these fancy animations. And you can do that. But if you need something simple that's like one click and you're done, that's kind of that's our specialty. That's what we focus on, is here's something that's going to be 90% of the best version possible, and it's really easy to use. And so,
and it's already there. Like, it's just that, like, you don't have to upload anything else. Like, it's just an option. As soon as you put up your episode, you have the option right there. It's like, oh, by the way, do you want to create this thing? And it's just almost not even like a whole other step. It's almost like a half a step, because then all you have to do is click a few buttons and it's done. So I like that about it.
Yeah. And then the other feature that we released, I want to say sometime last year.
Being a woman in business comes with its own unique set of challenges, but also so many opportunities. We get ahead by leaning in to what makes us different from business as usual. I'm Samantha Hartley, host of Profitable Joyful Consulting, inviting you to a special 6-episode series exploring the experience of being a woman in business. You want to hear from women consultants who've hit $1 million, who sell 6-figure engagements, or who've broken their own revenue ceilings? Yeah, those are my clients, and they'll be sharing too. Join me for 6 must-listen episodes that tackle key challenges for women consultants.
Follow Profitable Joyful Consulting on your favorite podcast app.
Was we started offering transcriptions within BuzzSprout as well, because we get a lot of people that asked, like, okay, I have this podcast, but I also want to have blog content, or I want to be more SEO friendly for people that are discovering my show. And so we designed a transcription service within BuzzSprout. So once you upload your audio, your episode that you're putting out, you can transcribe it and have it create essentially like a printed out script of everything that you say in the episode. And you can edit that, copy and paste it into your own website as a blog, as expanded show notes and things like that. And we've heard a lot of really positive feedback about that feature as well. Just being able to take the content you've already created and get more leverage out of it and be able to use it in multiple places.
That's awesome. And I honestly, this is like on my to-do list because I'm like, there's so many moving pieces to everything I have going on, but this is something I definitely want to utilize in the future, is doing the transcriptions, because I do think that, there's a lot of areas that you can make a huge impact. And like you said, the SEO friendliness of doing it, like this is something I really want to do because I want to ramp up. I want to make everything so much better. I guess that's just like my thing. But so this podcast mostly focuses on brand new podcasters or people that are wanting to, get into this space. Maybe they're a little hesitant to start. So what advice, because you have your own podcast, am I correct?
Yes. Yeah. So I produce several podcasts for Buzzsprout. And then, but before I worked here, I had podcasts of my own, which would make sense. If Buzzsprout's going to hire me to teach people how to podcast, I should be doing it.
Right.
So yeah, so I have podcasts that I produce outside of Buzzsprout for my own personal purposes. And one thing that definitely was a learning curve for me was figuring out what success looks like. Like, how should I measure success? I'm not Oprah Winfrey, I'm not Conan O'Brien. So when I start a podcast, I'm not going to have millions of people flooding in to listen to each episode. But I also want to know, like, is this worth it? Like, I'm putting all this effort into making these episodes. Should I keep going? Or is this not going to ultimately be helpful for me in my larger goals? And so something that I learned that I think I've been able to kind of think through more and more as I coach and train up new podcasters is just to focus on what you can control. It's really easy to hear about other people's success or to hear about other people's download statistics and think, wow, I'm so insignificant. Like, they're getting 10 times as many downloads as I am, and it just seems like it's happening so easily for them, whereas I'm really trying really hard and nothing's happening, or it's not happening as fast as I want it to.
Right.
But so much of that is out of our control, right? Like, we can't control necessarily how many people decide to subscribe and listen to our podcast. We can't control the size of our current email list or our reach on social media or our network. Like, those aren't things that do us any good to think about or be anxious about. And so instead, what I try to do and what I encourage other people to do is just to focus on where you are now, and then what's the next step? What's the next thing that you want to do? What's the next thing you want to accomplish? And then make sure that that's leading you to ultimately where you want to end up. Not everybody's podcast dreams and aspirations are the same. And so it would be foolish to put a lot of time and effort into living out somebody else's dream for your podcast. And so that's something I always come back to, is just make sure that you're doing it for the right reason, that it's taking you where you ultimately want to go, and to not get so bogged down on where you are, but to just focus on what you can control to make your podcast a little bit better and try and grow your audience a little bit.
Oh my gosh, Travis, like you just hit the nail on the head for so many of my own thoughts that I had, because I've been doing this for about a year now. It's been over a year. And so just thinking about all that, like whoever is listening right now, they needed to hear that, because that's exactly what I needed to hear. There was a lot of comparison at the beginning, and you join these online communities where people are talking about their success, and someone just launched and they got 100,000 downloads in their first 2 months. And you're like, okay, like it's possible. That's what's going to happen for me. And then it took me, like, full transparency, it was, I think, 5 months to get 1,000 downloads for me. So it was like, oh my gosh, like I'm a failure. It's like deflating. But to hear you say that, you've been in this world for a long time, and you work with podcasters. So when you say that, I know it's just a genuine, heartfelt, like, everybody's journey is different. And so I really appreciate you saying that. But I have to say that I just love all that BuzzSprout does. Like, I mean, obviously I'm a super fangirl of everything that y'all do. And I love y'all's online resources, the blogs, everything. And I know y'all, you just did your soundbite feature. So what is the next thing? Like, what's on the horizon? What are some of the things that are going on in the industry that y'all are paying attention to and possibly thinking about bringing to your audience?
Well, I think it's helpful to I guess first talk about who we are trying to help.
Okay.
Because if, as people are listening, they're entrepreneurs, they understand this. You can't serve everybody,
Right.
Otherwise, you do a mediocre job of putting out a lackluster product. And so, for BuzzSprout, we consider our ideal customer or our avatar to be an independent podcaster, somebody who's starting this on their own, bootstrapping it. They have a limited budget. They're just trying to get something going. Maybe it's to serve their business. It's a hobby. It's a passion. They have a message they want to share, and they don't have the technical, know-how of an audio engineer. Like, that is who we're trying to serve. Recently, we've been having a lot of discussions on Buzzcast, which is our roundtable discussion podcast about where podcasts are going and some big changes that are happening in the world of podcasts. And so as we put out new features and kind of keep an eye on the scope of what's happening, it's always about helping those independent podcasters be successful. A lot of the advice that we see, a lot of the tips and common knowledge or what people say is like the thing to do for podcasters aren't really designed for people that are just getting started or are, editing and promoting their own shows. It's
Right.
for people that have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of downloads. Yeah, it benefits them, but that's a small fraction of people that have podcasts.
Right.
And so our focus is, training, equipping podcasters to be successful, overcome those early obstacles that could discourage you from continuing, and then giving you all the tools you need to promote your podcast. So, like, recently we revamped our embed player for people that have their own podcast, their own websites, and they want to share their episodes there. And we're continuing to make tweaks to that to make it easier for people to subscribe on different platforms, even from your website.
Oh, that's cool.
And so within the Wave player, they can click on the subscribe button and it'll pop up with links to all of the apps and directories and catchers that you're listed in. And so even if they're listening to your podcast on your website, they can then go and subscribe in Spotify, or they can subscribe in Apple Podcasts. So it's just like things like that we're trying to make it easier for people that have their own podcast to be successful with achieving their goals, without necessarily trying to figure out, okay, how are we going to do dynamic ad insertion, because that'll help 0.1% of people that use BuzzSprout.
Right.
So that's kind of where our focus is. We have several different irons in the fire right now, products that we're excited about and features that we're excited about, but we don't promise anything that hasn't happened yet, because things can happen in the design cycle.
Right.
And we think something else happened, take a month to complete, and it ends up being 6 months, or we go down one path and then decide it's actually not the best solution and we pivot. So I don't want to overpromise, but I think you'll be very excited and very pleased as we start rolling out some of these things we've been working on.
Well, very cool. Well, what is the best way if someone's listening to this and they're like, well, I want to know when BuzzSprout comes out with that. So what is the best way? Is it to, excuse me, is it to listen to the podcast? Is it to follow the blog? Like, what is your best way for people to kind of just stay in the know about what's going on with BuzzSprout?
So the medium that we've been using to promote new features as we come out with them is the blog. That's typically where we'll do a write-up, a full-page write-up, not only of what we've just finished working on, but also the best way to use it, how to utilize it for your podcast, and really equip people with the knowledge and the understanding to be able to use new features. Because I use software products all the time where it's like, hey, we got this great thing. I'm like, that's cool, I guess.
Right.
but how does that
How do
how's that
I
help
use
me?
this?
Right. So and we put out blog articles every single week. Typically, if you check in on Tuesdays, that's a really good day to kind of go and see if there's anything new. But then also with Buzzcast, which is one of our podcasts, we've started reviewing new products as they come out. So I think in our last episode or 2 episodes ago, we talked about some new things we had just finished in our recent design cycle. Every 2 months or so, we release new features. That's kind of the frequency that we have. And so Buzzcast as well, we also kind of keep people in the loop of new things that are happening with BuzzSprout and different things that we're experimenting with.
Okay, awesome. Well, I kind of just want to do a few rapid fire questions if you're up for it. They're all about podcasting. And I just thought of like 3 of them while we this whole time. I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to ask him this because you have so much podcast knowledge. And I know that some of these may be questions that people have thought, but they haven't actually said out loud. Either they're too scared to ask or, but Travis and I have we've had a few interactions. I've been on the Buzzcast episode, our podcast episode. And then we've had some exchanges in Facebook. So he knows I'm a question asker. That's just by nature. This is who I am. So I have a few questions. And the first one is, what's the biggest podcasting mistake you've ever made?
Biggest one, huh?
The biggest one.
I think the biggest podcasting mistake I ever made was trying to make a podcast that's the podcast I was trying to emulate typically had a staff of 12 to 15 people, and I was trying to do it myself.
Oh my
So one of the first podcasts, so this is several years ago when I was first getting started in podcasting, I really loved Startup, which was a Gimlet podcast about starting a podcast company. Very meta, very fourth wall breaking, but anyways. So I loved it. I loved the format. I loved how they mixed it with the music and the sound effects and live recordings and narrated portions. And I'm like, I'm going to create this kind of podcast for what I'm working on. And this is the first time I've ever made a podcast. And I just happened to choose the most difficult kind of podcast to make. And so, it took me like 35 to 40 hours per episode to make a 20-minute episode. Luckily I was only releasing them every other week. And so it was still a part-time job, like legit a part-time job just to make the episodes, not even promote them or anything. And so after 10 episodes, I was like, that was a great experiment. Now let me figure out something that's a little more doable. That's not going to take me 35 to 40 hours per episode. And I ended up landing on a format where I was doing, just some solo episodes, some interview episodes similar to what you do with your podcast. And that has been a lot more sustainable for me. So I think the mistake I made was, trying to bite off more than I could chew.
Yes. So if you're listening, the moral of the story is model after people. If you're a solo person, model your podcast after someone that's a solo, not someone that has a team of 12. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Okay. So my next question is, what's the one piece of equipment that you are just loving right now?
That's really tough. So I think the microphone that I've been the most impressed with recently is the new Rode Pod mic, which Rode released several months ago in Australia and is now shipping in the US, I believe. Where I've used Rode microphones for years, always been very impressed with them, but the price point has always kind of been on the higher end for like a really solid Rode microphone. And you can't really go wrong with any microphone. It's really how you use it, but they just did a really great job for under $100 having an XLR microphone that copied a lot of the features of their higher end microphones. So I've found myself recommending that microphone a lot to people that use XLR cables, which XLR just means it's like the traditional microphone cable, whereas USB is pretty common now with Blue Yetis and ATR 2100s and things like that, where you can plug the microphone directly into the computer. XLR is like the industry standard for the music industry. And so if you have that kind of a setup, then I've been recommending that microphone a lot in the last couple months.
And so say it for us one more time.
The Rode
model.
The Rode Pod mic.
The Rode Pod mic. So I'm going to link to that in the show notes. That way, if anyone's interested and you want to check it out, then I appreciate that recommendation, because that is one that I have not heard a lot of people recommend. I've been hearing so much about the ATR 2100, and I personally have a Blue Yeti. So, and it's been fun to experiment. So if you're just starting and you think that you have to buy the best like piece of most expensive like equipment, like no, please don't go do that. Like do work off, check a few things out, work off of recommendations. And I know Buzzsprout has, I think you'll have a few blog posts about microphones and equipment and everything. So go check there and see what they recommend. But the last question that I have for you, okay, so if you have your Travis Albritton podcast and you're doing your thing, right? Who is your dream guest? Who is the one person that you wish that you could sit down and interview?
So the first answer that comes to mind is probably not the person I would actually want as a podcast guest. So my education background is in aerospace engineering, rocket science.
Okay.
So that's what I did before I was a podcaster. And which whenever I tell that to people that aren't into podcasts, they're like, what? Why would you ever give that up? But podcasting is more fun. So from like that angle, I would like to interview Elon Musk, but all of the interviews I've seen of him, it's just, he's really difficult to talk to.
Right.
You're not really sure which kind of Elon Musk you're going to get. If it's the one that's been working 18 hours a day for the last 3 months and he's like a zombie, or if he's like actually engaged. But I think just like from a nerd perspective, I would love to interview Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Okay.
Who's kind of like he's a scientist, but he's much more approachable. Has a podcast called Star Talk, which is funny and relatable and things like that. Either that or an astronaut. One of Neil deGrasse Tyson or an astronaut would probably be my top.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. And thank you for all of your knowledge that you've shared with us today. I really appreciate it. So if someone is wanting to try Buzzsprout out, they're thinking, I think I'm ready. I think I'm to the point where I'm ready to pick my hosting site. What do they need to do? What are the steps that they need to take to get connected with Buzzsprout?
So the first thing you would do is go to buzzsprout.com and you can sign up for a free account. So you can sign up for free to get started, to try it out, to see if you like it. And if you already have a podcast, you can actually transfer it to Buzzsprout really easily. We have a whole process. It's automated. You can do it yourself and see what your podcast would look like in Buzzsprout before you make the official switch. So that's the first thing you would do. And then I would look through our resources like our blog, our YouTube channel, and then we have several podcasts that we produce that kind of have different purposes. So How to Start a Podcast is a 7-episode mini podcast course that kind of gets you up to speed. Like, okay, you're thinking about starting a podcast. Here's how you come up with an idea. Here's how you choose a microphone, like those kind of things. And people have found that to be really helpful for just kind of getting started and feeling their way through to their first episode. And then beyond that, we have 5-Minute Mondays, which is a podcast that comes out every Monday where I try to say something in 5 minutes or less. That typically, I wish I wish I had called it 10-Minute Mondays,
Right.
But I'm sticking to it. So it's a 5-minute or less podcast strategy episode. So common questions that podcasters have, different tips and hacks and strategies to help you be successful. We have Buzzcast, which is our podcast where we kind of talk internally with the Buzzsprout team, with Kevin, who's the co-founder of Buzzsprout, Albin, who's our head of marketing, and then myself. And we just kind of talk through what's going on in the podcasting world and how it affects independent podcasters. And then also Podcasting in Real Life, which is our interview podcast where we talk to people that aren't like professionals yet, but they're not beginners either. Right. And so hearing their stories, hearing how podcasting has impacted them personally, and then all the tips and things that they've picked up along the way. People have found that to be really helpful because it's helpful to hear from someone who's just 2 or 3 steps ahead of you.
Right.
Instead of somebody who's, already at the finish line talking to you at the starting line can feel kind of daunting. But when you hear it from someone who you can relate to, people have said it gives them more confidence to feel like they can do it too. So all of those resources are helpful. And I'm sure Crystal will leave lots of wonderful links for you to make it easy to find everything.
Yes, I'm going to put all of this in the show notes so you will be able to find all of this. And I don't think we've really talked about it much, but also join the BuzzSprout Facebook community, because that is where y'all, so many amazing conversations happen over there. And it's just, it runs the gamut of podcasters, people that have been in the industry for 20 plus years, and people, they came from radio. There's people that are just starting. There's people that talk about just some of the coolest things. So definitely go check out the Facebook group as well. But Travis, thank you so much for being here and sharing everything. And I'll be sure to link to everything. And we just appreciate you sharing all of your podcast hosting knowledge with us.
Thanks for having me. I had a blast.
Y'all, that was such a good interview with Travis. I'm so grateful for BuzzSprout and all the great resources that they have, but just for their honesty, really. I feel like there's just so much transparency with this organization on, how they're helping other people and their vision to help the little guys. That's what I feel like, right? I feel like, there are those top 1%ers that have the millions and millions of downloads, and I think that's great for them. But BuzzSprout is really looking out for people just like you and I, who are trying to make an impact, no matter how big or how small that is, within the communities that we're already a part of, and using our expertise to teach other people through the platform of podcasting. So I so appreciate that about them. So be sure to check out the show notes at crystalprofit.com/episode 73 for everything that we talked about today. I know that there were tons of great recommendations and so many resources for you to check out if you're brand new to podcasting. And I really want you to go look at that Tim Ferriss article that Travis talked about. I'm putting that in the links. That way you can go see it. But that does it for this episode. So if this is your first time tuning in, I'd love for you to subscribe to the show and hear what other fun things we're going to be talking about in the next few weeks. Be sure to sign up for our 5-day podcast bootcamp and check out the other great resources we have in our resource library at crystalprofit.com/tips and strategies. And be sure to sign up for the waitlist for Profit Podcasting, because like I said, it opens on August 30th and it's only going to be open for a few days, so you don't want to miss out. But remember, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere. Hey, Profit Podcast listeners, thanks for sticking around to a little bit after the episode to hear this special message, because I want to hear from you. We are starting a new segment called Fan Mail Shoutouts, and I want to hear from you, and I want to hear your questions. What do you want to know? What questions have you been dying to ask me? So here's how to make this happen. Go to the app where you're listening to this podcast right now. Go there. I'll wait a second. Okay. Now, once you're there, you're going to see a hyperlink at the top of the episode description that says, send Crystal a text message. And that's all I want you to do. Send me a text. It could be casual, informal. It could be totally anonymous. Or if you want, you can include your name and the name of your podcast or content wherever you are creating, and I will give you a special shout out in an upcoming episode. So again, go to the show notes for where you're listening to this episode right now, and it will say, send Crystal a text message. And I cannot wait to hear from you and give you a shout out in an upcoming segment of Fan Mail Shoutouts.